Thank you for picking Oenick University. Relevant, to the point, and on demand. Rene Descartes. Rene Descartes, 1596 to 1650, is the author of perhaps the most famous philosophical quote of all, Cogito ergo sum, usually rendered as I think, therefore I am. There is, however, more to this quote and more to Descartes' philosophy than meets the eye. Rene Descartes was reasonably young when burning astronomers seemed to the Church the right thing to do. Orthodox thinking at the time regarded the Church as the center of the created order, with the heavenly bodies, all perfect spheres, tracing arcs around the earth in divinely ordained circular orbits. Not only did Galileo see through his telescope moons orbiting something else, namely Jupiter, but he observed too that at least some of the planets were not themselves perfect spheres. They were bumpy, irregular, maybe squashed. Some looked a bit cracked and marked, not at all the kind of shoddy work one expects from the Creator. Despite the Church's warnings, Galileo pursued all of this in writing. He attracted the attention of the Inquisition, which forced his public recantation. It is hard not to think that all of this had a large influence on Descartes. So too did his formal education amongst the Jesuits of the Collège de la Fête, begun when he was just 10 years old. The Jesuits promised clear and certain knowledge in return for diligent labor and careful study. As Descartes came of age, he found himself deeply troubled by uncertainty. He pouts, quote, "There was no such learning in the world as I had been led to hope." End quote. If Copernicus and Galileo were right, how could we have gone so spectacularly wrong in thinking about such large questions as where the Earth is, or whether or not it moves, or what the planets are doing? In the midst of such embarrassments, Descartes found a single and remarkable expectation: mathematics. He was more than simply a mathematical genius or prodigy, and his successes in it convinced him that its methods might one day be employed to secure truth in all other disciplines. The Copernican view. He presented a version of this thinking in his first major work, Rules for the Direction of the Mind, and made use of it in a large scientific treatise called The World. In the later, Descartes joins Galileo in advocating a heliocentric Copernican view of the solar system, as well as the notion that humans might aspire to a godlike understanding of the world. It was published in 1633, the very year in which Galileo was nearly destroyed by the Inquisition. Descartes heeded the lesson of Galileo's experience and suppressed his book himself. 4 years later, he published anonymously the parts of the book on geometry, optics, and meteorology, prefaced by what we now know as the Discourse on Method. It contains not only Descartes' rules for right reasoning in general, but also the foundation of his epistemology and metaphysics. In the short passage, Descartes breaks with more than 1,000 years of thinking and ushers in the era of modern philosophy. The preoccupations, aims, and assumptions characteristic of the following 300 years of philosophy are largely those of Descartes. The method is a generalization of Descartes' conception of mathematical demonstration. Even the most complex mathematical proofs are accomplished by a series of smaller steps. The truth of each, as well as nearby connections, are easily grasped. But so, too, Descartes argues for all rational inquiry. Descartes encapsulates his method in 4 rules. 1. Accept nothing as true, which is not presented to the mind so clearly and distinctly that there is no reason to doubt it. 2. Break problems down into as many smaller problems as possible. 3. Begin with what is most simple and easily understood, and build on this by degrees to larger and more complex matters. 4. Review the entire chain of thinking to ensure nothing is omitted. Descartes first notes that the senses can be deceptive. For instance, when one sees a stick which appears bent in a stream, and a wise person never trusts that which one deceives him. Ought we therefore never trust our sense-based beliefs? The argument cannot prove this much, not least because we would not be aware of illusions if we had no faith at all in sensory perception. We discover that the stick is not really bent by calling on the reinforcements of other sensory experiences. We feel the stick or take it out of the water and look at it again. Descartes acknowledges this, saying that it would be a little crazy to think, just on the basis of the odd illusion, that he was not seated by the fire right now, writing in his own notebook. Doubt and knowledge. The first rule is probably the best known, as it is boldly expressed in the opening paragraphs of Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, perhaps the most important book of the modern period. Descartes hopes to secure a firm foundation for the natural sciences by establishing a first truth or truths. He does so by rejecting any beliefs which are open to even the slightest doubt, in hope that at least one belief will survive and serve as the basis for further truths. The conception of knowledge operative here and in his other writings depend on a strict relation between knowing and certainty. If one genuinely knows some proposition, there is no reason at all for doubt. Knowing requires certainty. Therefore, while the skeptical arguments of the first meditation might seem unpersuasive to one in a casual frame of mind, do note that Descartes is in pursuit of certain truth. If he finds even the slightest reason to doubt some belief or other, the belief is no candidate for the firm foundation he seeks. The second argument undercuts even this sort of everyday belief. One might be dreaming that one sees what one sees. Dreams at the time of dreaming anyway can seem just like waking life. If we have no criterion by which to distinguish being awake from being asleep, how do we know that for any belief we take to be true, we might not have dreamt is true? Maybe your belief that your hand is holding this book is false. Actually, you are sound asleep, your eyes are closed, and your hand is under the pillow. The trouble here is that for any alleged criterion for wakefulness, we can imagine the possibility of dreaming its satisfaction. You might dream of pitching yourself, or waking up and realizing you were dreaming, and so on. Descartes argues that the dreaming possibility proves quite a bit. It casts doubt on all beliefs which require the world to be a certain way, and leaves us with only belief in the most simple and universal things, facts about bodies and shapes in general, place and time, and the truths of mathematics and logic. These remaining beliefs are rendered dubious by certain reflections on our origins. We might have been created deliberately by God, who is certainly powerful enough to have built us to go wrong even with regard to simple and universal things, say something as obvious as counting the sides of a square. If the possibility of a deceptive God is too heretical for you, Descartes offers the possibility of a malicious demon bent on your confusion. Or we owe our existence to a sequence of accidental causes, in which case it is all the more likely that we are imperfectly built and again might go wrong with respect to even the most simple and universal things. The first meditation ends with Descartes contemplating the possibility that all his former beliefs are open to doubt. Cartesian dualism. It turns out, though, that one resilient belief remains. If deluded by illusion, led astray by a dream, or deceived by a demon, Descartes nevertheless cannot doubt that he himself exists. This is the first certainty of the Meditations, the anchor or foundation on which the Cartesian project depends. Quote, "This proposition, I am, I exist, whenever I utter it or conceive it in my mind, is necessarily true." End quote. The Latin for this discovery, cogito ergo sum, or I am thinking, therefore I exist, is perhaps the best known philosophical catchphrase ever formulated. It is on the basis of the cogito, as this first certainty is sometimes called, and in accord with his method, that Descartes attempts to build a series of additional truths. The certainty, though, is a bare one. By I, Descartes means only a thing which thinks, which doubts, affirms, seems to see, hopes, and so on. His bodily nature and bodies in general remain open to doubt. This epistemological distinction is transformed by Descartes into a shaky metaphysical one, Cartesian dualism. The mind and body are distinct things, different kinds of substances. Minds are things which think, and bodies are extended things, or space occupiers. The argument for the distinction depends on conceivability. It is conceivable that the mind can exist without the body. It is therefore possible that the mind can exist without the body. If such a thing is possible, then the mind and body cannot be the same thing. But of course, conceivability is no sure guide to possibility. What we conceive of depends on our background of theory and experience. It tells us something about our concepts, but nothing clearly follows about the way the world is. The distinction faces our problems too, perhaps the most difficult of which is the problem of interaction. Exactly how can a thinking substance, which Descartes claims is not located in space, stand in a causal relation to a body, a thing which is located in space? This is a version of the mind-body problem. The 20th century philosophy of mind might be viewed as an attempt to struggle free of the concepts of mind and body Descartes has bequeathed to us. We have not yet managed it. We have many new distinctions and formulations of the problem. We have even contemplated some uncomfortable solutions, but it would be optimistic to say that we are much closer to the solution than was Descartes. Whatever we make of dualism, Descartes follows the cogito with further reflections, careful to assent only to that which is clearly and distinctively perceived, nothing in particular, the idea of a perfect God, resident amongst the contents of his mind. Arguing that an effect must have at least as much reality or perfection as its cause, he claims that he could not simply have invented the idea of God. So Descartes is led to the belief that God exists and a conception of God as both a creator and a being without defect. Being deceptive is a kind of defect, and so Descartes reasons that God is no deceiver. If God is no deceiver, then we are not systematically misled with respect to those things we clearly and distinctively perceive, beliefs which survive our best and most careful scrutiny. It is a short step from here to the recovery of certain beliefs about the external world. You might have noticed a tight circle in this series of reflections. God's goodness ensures that our clear and distinct perceptions are true. The proof of God's existence depends on such clear and distinct perceptions. The trouble is part of Descartes' legacy to us. Beliefs seem easy to undermine but impossible to restore. Most commentators agree that Descartes' negative project of belief destruction succeeds, but his positive efforts to restore a firm foundation fail. Contemporary epistemology is, in large measure, an attempt to exorcise Descartes' demon.